Builders, backstories, breakthroughs. This is the Journey in Conversation.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Journey in Conversation. Today I have in the virtual studio one of my favorite people ever, Benjamin Lappalainen, who is now with UKAI Projects. Ben, how are you doing, man?
I'm great. I guess it's been around 10 days or so since I got back from Taiwan, back in Toronto now. Happy to be back. Had a really cool experience, but
and I want to hear all about it. Everybody wants to hear all about it for sure. But before we get to that, why don't you give everyone your shorthand origin story? You know, whether it's villain or superhero, where'd you come from? Who are you? What do you do?
Yeah, so my name is Benjamin Lappalainen. I was born in Markham, so a little bit north of Toronto. Went to school at the University of Toronto for engineering. I did engineering science. The aerospace specialization, kind of realized partway through the program that wasn't really an industry that I wanted to be in. You know, a lot of red tape, proximity to military industrial complex. Just not something that I wanted to start my career in. So I made partway through a pivot to tech. I very luckily got a QA position at Nanoleaf, where we both worked. And then kind of worked my way up through there. I built the screen mirroring technology, which was initially kind of like a passion project. We developed the desktop app around that. And then I was a product manager there for a number of years. After a number of years, I found that I just wasn't really as satisfied with the work that I was doing. I personally really enjoy being in the details and building stuff myself. And so I made the decision to part ways with the company. It was kind of a gradual parting, where initially I quit and then I went back part-time, and we had a good thing going. Everything was on good terms. But yeah, these days I am pretty much entirely freelance. I mean, my work with UKAI Projects is, I think in a way, like I'm spending a lot of time with them, but it's also kind of project-based, on and off. But aside from that, the usual short pitch that I give people is that I am a creative technologist, educator, and artist.
And I can absolutely attest to kind of your detail-oriented nature and getting really, really, really interested in the fine granular bits and bobs of how things work. You know, I remember one evening we were both at the office at Nanoleaf before it moved, and you were working on screen mirror and I was working on something else crazy, and just like I needed a break, so I came down and hung out in the room where you were kind of working on the screen mirroring stuff. And you just like unprompted launched into this. It was probably a good 15 or 20 minutes where you started explaining like the bits and bobs of what you were working on, and like the very, very detailed kind of like orientation around how streaming was going to work, streaming control and everything. And it was like, this is really cool. And one of the things that I loved the most about after that, I remember thinking, you know, Ben really explained that in a way that made a lot of sense to me. And, you know, I'm not someone who is like a Luddite, can't open a laptop or anything, but I'm also not an engineer. So the fact that we could have that one singular conversation, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, all of that stuff that he was talking about the other day, like it clicked, and I can see the application of that, how it's going to work and the value that it brings. So, you know, just personal little high five from me.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, like, I guess that's something I really pride myself in, of like being able to generally quite well explain like technical concepts to anyone. And, you know, especially once I kind of get an idea of like where they're coming from and their skill levels and experiences, like being able to relate or relay the concepts in a way that makes sense to them is like just so satisfying, because like having people like you or anybody else get that real like light bulb moment, where you really understand maybe something that might have felt kind of out of your grasp before it was explained in that way. Yeah, and that's why I like teaching these days when I have the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, and that seminar that you gave on small language models, like local use of AI earlier this year that I went to, was similarly also really good. And the things that you talked about during that seminar, like I always had this concept that smaller language models could work on hardware, but I'd never really made the time to like fiddle around with it, because my impression was always that it would take a lot of work kind of tinkering on the command line, which on Mac and Linux I'm not super comfortable in. I'm way more comfortable in kind of like the MS-DOS simulated environment, because when I was growing up it was all Windows PCs, right?
We're very opposite in that regard.
Yeah, but it's so funny because as an operating system now, like using the GUI, I'm way more comfortable with Mac. Like I've been using Macs for work for 15 years now, give or take. So it just like the GUI environment makes a lot more sense to me on Mac. But in that seminar, you were talking about this is how we can deploy smaller language models right to the local workstation and not require those cloud-based connections. This is how it works. Here's the intermediary software that we can use to make this happen without a whole lot of fiddling around. And for me, that was like, oh, there's an intermediary layer that you can use to install these models and kind of operate them that way without a whole lot of like fucking around. Sorry, people at home. So like that clicked for me, and that kind of speaks also to your desire to be an educator in creative things. I've been building out a lot of my workflows using those smaller language models on the local workstation, and it displaces a ton of stuff that I was doing with ChatGPT and with cloud on a cloud-based system. And for folks who haven't experimented in that kind of way, haven't looked at running LLMs locally, like maybe do it, because at some point all of these like big players in AI are going to follow the path of Uber, and the services, they won't be as cheap anymore as they are now. They'll be a lot more expensive. They'll be a lot more controlling. You'll be locked to them more. You'll be kind of stuck with them, and the price points will escalate. So if you can start now to kind of defragment that kind of reality and get yourself a little bit more kind of spread around and doing stuff with software that's in your own kind of control, it might kind of work for you. But anyway, not to take away from this conversation with that. That's just kind of some of the stuff that came out of this seminar that held that I went to, which is really cool.
Yeah, no, I mean, it just kind of piggybacking on that, like one of the biggest things, like obviously there's the personal satisfaction that I get out of explaining and teaching things to people, but I really think that one of my big goals with the education is, I guess, broadly just to, wherever I can, increase technical literacy for people, particularly around topics of emerging technologies, or emerging technologies, at least in the consumer space. Because I think really, if people don't know how things work, at least to some extent, it becomes very difficult for you to make critical decisions around what you choose or to use or not use, right? And like it's the example I always like to give is like if you take your car to a mechanic and you have no idea how your car works, they can kind of say whatever they want to you and you need to pay them, right? So like unless you can call BS and with some degree of knowledge that you have, you're really at the mercy, and you have to trust the person who knows that technology, right? And so I think whenever possible, like getting people at least moderately equipped, not to understand every single aspect of how the thing works, but at least the broad strokes, so that they, if they see the technology giving them something that maybe they don't expect, or even something that they do expect, they can at least have an inkling of how it got there and why it's doing the thing that it does, why that might be good and why that might be bad. So yeah, I think that's just a huge motivator for why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I think that all to say is kind of like, if we continue going down this route of like, oh, companies are constantly optimizing and making things more convenient such that you as the user effectively never have to understand how things work, that just puts them more and more in control of what you do. And that's a dangerous path to go down. So I'm trying to do my part to help educate people to prevent that, I guess.
Yeah, and creating in that vein, like the more that a dependency is created between you and anything really, whether it's the technology, whether it's pharmaceutical, if it's a chemical dependency from like a prescription you've got, or anything else, like the weaker that your agency becomes, and if you don't understand the choices in front of you, then you don't have any agency. And I think that that's kind of particularly potent with this this moment that we're seeing AI explode into the mainstream. Though you and I kind of had this conversation before. It's like, oh, so AI exploded into the mainstream, which just means that it has a brand and a hype machine now, because artificial intelligence, it's been around for a very long time, and it comes in a lot of different forms.
Yeah, so much like the explosion into the mainstream is mostly like the chat GPTs of the world, and it's cool and impressive what these language models are capable of doing now. But yeah, just acknowledging that AI in itself is really a philosophical term, I think, and there is no actual like specific technical description of like what an AI system constitutes. Like there's neural networks and like deep learning and things like that, which are certainly technical terms, or more technical at least. But AI can kind of be, it's a philosophical, like people have been talking about like AI in video games for like, controlling computer controlled enemies and things like that for ages. So I think it's really, a very broad descriptor.
And it connects to the larger picture of not to get too meta for our audience at home, but it connects to that larger question of what is intelligence, and beyond that, what is sentience? Because sentience is really the thing that a lot of people in their minds draw a dotted line to, like, oh, AI is connected to sentience, and the whole Skynet thing, like with AI like being something that can take over the world and destroy us all. There's really a backdoor conversation around that, and a concept anchored to it in sentience. You can't have that level of control and either good or malice without some form of sentience. And I don't see any pathway where these systems can have sentience. And even as like human beings, we have trouble defining sentience. We have these questions. We've had these questions going back decades saying, oh, dolphins are smart. Are dolphins also sentient? Who knows? We don't know how to define sentience. We don't know how to measure it. And we certainly don't know how to say yes or no definitively.
Yeah, so many interesting, once again, I guess just philosophical questions of like, what like is so many people think of bugs, even like biologists think of bugs to some degree as like biological machines, right? It's like they're they fulfill a purpose based on their inputs and have relatively little capacity in some degrees. But then you also, see videos of like jumping spiders that are like really cute and seem to like their owners and then things like that. So, very, very, very strange. Just like kind of on that topic, a little tangential, I just wanted to bring it up because it was an interesting paper that I read recently. I was doing a little bit of research on like genetic algorithms. So these are basically digital representations of systems that you might find in biology, which allow you to effectively mimic a process of evolution over some number of generations, where you have a number of traits, and those traits are either dominant or submissive, and then depending on how the organism, which is just like a digital piece of code, fares in an environment, which is also digital. The digital organisms are either capable of creating a new generation, which kind of evolves based on the traits of the organisms that breed together, or they die out. And in this context, the author of the paper was essentially talking about the creativity of evolution as a whole, like whether you're talking about organic evolution or digital evolution. And I guess like what creativity, the reason I'm getting into this is just because of like the kind of conversation around like AI art and things like that, and like what constitutes something as being creative. And can you have something that is functionally like, is evolution, even though it's not like an entity, can it be intelligent and can it be creative? Because I mean, if you look at all of the species of plants and animals and, you know, all the kind of different forms that life comes in, I mean, I would call evolution creative, right? But then we're assigning, you know, something that is generally considered, I guess, a very human trait to something that doesn't have a body or a brain, right? So I think it's just a very, definitely a sidebar, but just an interesting topic that I've been thinking about a lot recently.
So in a world first, you have just merged the diverging realities of creationism and evolution. Congratulations. Let's take the rest of the day off. No, it's really, yeah, what you're kind of describing there. I find it kind of interesting because, you know, we think about those human traits like creativity, you know, intelligence. Can we design something rationally? We design like systems. We design, you know, our lives. We design things, tools for us to use. That's kind of an innate part of the human experience. But I kind of wonder, after what you've said, like, you know, are we assigning those, or are we considering those human traits because of our other habit of holding up a mirror to our environment and seeing ourselves reflected in our environment? So maybe those human traits are actually traits of our environment, and we're kind of picking up on them subconsciously and making them something that you know, that we own as human beings. And aren't we special? We're the only ones who can own that. Well, maybe not. Maybe it's just a part of nature and we're observing it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, humans, if we're pretty damn good at pattern recognition, right? And we to the point of us seeing things that are also not necessarily there, right? And I think really that's, you know, we're seeing, I guess, bringing us back to AI a little bit, we're seeing that a lot in like how much people just out of habit like to anthropomorphize these systems, right? And, you know, treat them as people. Which, I mean, to be fair, and I guess as a tip for the viewer at home, kind of the more you anthropomorphize an AI system, at least the chatbot and like large language model style ones, typically the better that they will work for you. Just because like they're trained on human language and therefore they respond better when they are treated like people. That's not to say that they have feelings or care. It's just that based on the statistical model that exists in the systems, they will work better. So yeah, very, very interesting struggle. Because then also, if you treat them more like people, I mean, you know, we send rovers and satellites into space, and scientists become emotionally attached to these robots that have no thoughts, no feelings. They're just you know, circuits, metal, and solar panels and stuff like that, and people essentially like care for these things as if they were their pets. And yeah, it's humans are I guess like flawed but very nice in that regard, in that we care for so much. So yeah,
you could certainly see that evidence of that kind of anthropomorphizing of kind of LLMs in just the incredible backlash against OpenAI when they flipped on GPT-5. Tons of people had, they'd kind of bonded with the things that they'd built, the chat sessions, the projects they'd built. They created kind of a pseudo relationship structure with ChatGPT using like the 4.0 model, and it worked really, really well for those people. So when 5 came along and it launched with bugs, is the official story. And those pseudo relationships were kind of like broken down. There was a very real, visceral reaction to that. People did not like it. Yep. So you can kind of see like an illustration of that that phenomenon in that just a few weeks ago or whatever that happened.
Yeah, I think essentially you need to treat it kind of like a human relationship, where it's like acknowledging that over dependence is a bad thing. Right? It's like, if you have a system that like can act like a human and talk like a human, and humans are social beings, then functionally you need to apply the same cautions to the relationship that you would with another human being, at least in some areas. So yeah, I think it's and the other, I guess, more drastic, well, in a way, I guess, same sort of ballpark, but the like the AI psychosis that people are experiencing by being trapped in like an echo chamber with these conversations that they've had with the AI, and it convinces them that they're the Messiah or the chosen one, and it's a whole other realm of statistics behaving in a very concerning way, really. So yeah.
And another example of that kind of holding up the mirror sort of thing, right? Like there's a lot of both anecdotal and I think some pretty good peer-reviewed research coming out recently, like this year, that suggests that the way that LLMs, especially in their kind of chatbot configuration, the way that they interact with us is very much shaped by how we interact with them. And it's very much shaped by the context that we provide into the system, by the type of information that we're putting into it, and our behavior around it. So you kind of see those cases of AI psychosis, chatbot psychosis, and you have to kind of wonder to yourself, what are the guardrails that you could possibly put in place to minimize those things, and how can we better understand how those psychoses form in the first place, so that we can protect people? Like those are big questions, especially when you're operating on the scale of 100 million customers or 250 million customers that are using chatbots, LLMs like regularly. It's a big job. Like, I'm not at all shocked that none of the big AI kind of players and developers have put up their hand and said, we have cracked the code on how to make AI and humans interoperate harmlessly, and for like the betterment of all. Like, big question, how do you do it? Who knows?
Yep. And I think it's so it's always very interesting to me looking at these very big systems that do need to cater to and solve the problems of like users at such a large scale. And oftentimes, like, obviously, as a for-profit corporation, more users the better, great, whatever. But in terms of doing actual good for people, I mean, that's why I advocate for small kind of like homebrew community-based systems more often than not, because the problem with so many of the big systems is that you end up investing so much time and energy into preventing bad actors from misusing your system, which can, potentially even make it worse for the good uses of the system that, average good people are trying to use it for. An example that I think of is like, I'm not sure if you have looked at any of them before, but the system prompts, which is basically like the instructions to the LLM before you even chat with it. So it's kind of baked into all of the chats. for a given model, typically, or at least like the web interface. Those are all actually available to look at on a GitHub repo by people who have managed to like crack or like extract the system prompts. And it is fascinating to read through those, especially just realizing like how long of a document that they are, because it's essentially, you know, like hundreds and hundreds of words before you're even chatting with this thing that is, at least to some extent, deciding how it is going to act and behave in response to you, regardless of what your query is. And doing, I think it's a good idea for people to read through that, as well as to compare like, oh, like what does the ChatGPT system prompt look like in comparison to maybe Claude? And as you can get an idea, anthropomorphizing again, of like the personalities that the people who made the systems want to present to you, right? And at the end of the day, that's just a bundle of statistics that's doing its best to respect the instructions that it's given. So I think it's a very telling thing, especially with what certain companies choose to instruct versus others. Yeah, but then, you know, you as an individual, if you're using a large language model on your computer, you can set whatever system prompt you want, which allows you to kind of direct the system in your own way. And as you were saying as well, like with the dependency on these systems, as they get more and more, I guess, further along in the capitalist life cycle, like I'm not surprised if we start getting like casual advertisements slipped into the chats in a very natural way of like, oh, this AI company is sponsored by XYZ products. So when people ask the system about something around that topic, it'll slip that in as a higher up, you know, suggestion, right? So I think just being very mindful of where these systems are likely to go, not even necessarily because I don't trust the companies, but just that's how profit and capitalism works. Is it's everything becomes essentially a marketing advertising machine. So
100%. You know, at some point, the investors in particularly OpenAI are not going to be okay with the company burning $3 billion a quarter and not showing anything back for it, because, you know, speaking of capitalism, especially kind of late stage capitalism, I think we are well into now. Everything's kind of crazy, but you think about the system of capitalism, like capital flows because of investment. You know, innovation attracts investment, but people make the decision to invest their capital in something to generate a return. So if you're an investor, you're looking for, you know, if it's a traditional kind of financial vehicle, like something that's traded on the public markets that's very stable and predictable, like a REIT for commercial properties or whatever, you're looking for like a 7% to 12% kind of return. If you're doing the really, really, really risky stuff, like investing in an OpenAI, you're looking for much more than 7 to 12%. And your patience for the wait for that much more than 7 to 12% has a finite window. At some point, you put your foot down and say, "The money, please." And that's where I think you'll start to see things in these AI systems where you've got passive advertising. And I recall reading something a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago at this point, where OpenAI was running a bit of a demo around that, a prototype, like a trial around that particular thing for free ChatGPT users. I think it was in The Verge, they surfaced it. And there was this very conversational advertising, like, have you considered using X or Y or Z for this problem that you're talking about? And from the perspective of an advertiser, that's an opportunity, especially if AI does degrade like the traditional system of kind of web searches, and, you know, if Google.com ceases to become the place where we go to find information, if we just go to our chatbot instead, that kind of makes perfect sense. And I'd imagine that's why Google called its code red 3 years ago and just freaked the fuck out over a weekend and changed everything about their business, like in a heartbeat. So like I can see it going towards advertising, but do we want that as consumers and users? Maybe some of us are okay with it. Maybe some of us aren't. I'm kind of in the latter because I always worry about, all right, are the needs of the advertiser going to supplant the needs of me, the user? Are you showing me this because it's being paid for, or because it's actually the best thing that, you know, could be used by me to solve my problem? And if there's money on the table, it's always going to kind of go towards the money, right?
Yep, money talks. So I don't know. I have little confidence that it will be in the favor of the user, and like almost certainly not for the free one, right? Because like the general rule of thumb is if you're using a service and it's free, then you're the product. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That was an awesome tangent. But let's kind of bring it back towards UKAI Projects.
Sure.
You know, you mentioned that you had just gotten home. You've been home from Taiwan for a couple of weeks now on a trip with working with UKAI over there. Tell us a little bit about that. Like, what were you up to in Taiwan?
Yeah, so I guess the title I forgot to put in my intro is I am the XR development lead of UKAI Projects. It's like kind of funny in a way for us to have like label ourselves with these relatively official titles, because we are a incredibly small team. We're essentially 3 people plus collaborators right now. But anyways, so UKAI Projects, our mission is, I guess in short, culture for what's coming. We believe that in the same way that tech companies have R&D departments, the goal is to optimize and to make things better. We believe that culture requires the same thing if we actually want to move things in a direction that is going to be valuable and beneficial to people. If we just kind of allow things to happen and the essentially the tech oligarchy to go in the direction that it has, then our semblance of culture is going to degrade or at least change drastically. And we've already seen that, like we've seen deeply concerning things happen in the world over the past couple decades, and it feels like very little has been done about it. And so we seek to kind of essentially prototype better ways of existing, living, operating with each other. And that's kind of our MO. We treat culture very broadly, as well as technology very broadly. Culture is everything from like the general habits and like work culture of a city, the schedules that people tend to operate on, the ways in which people carry out social interactions everywhere, anywhere, and everywhere. And technology is basically anything that can functionally be used as a tool. So, agriculture is a technology. Hammers, screwdrivers, those are technologies. It's very much not just limited to what I feel like immediately pops into most people's brains of computers when people say technology these days. So that's UKAI Projects. We got a residency in Taiwan, Hsinchu, Taiwan, which is slightly smaller city to the southwest of Taipei. It's actually where a lot of the Taiwan semiconductor factories are located and the fabs. And so we applied to an open call with it was hosted by the Acton Arts Foundation, which is a tech company in Taiwan. And the Taiwanese government, I believe, mandates that companies put a certain percentage of their profits into social and community benefit. And as a result, a lot of the companies, interestingly, for better or worse, end up having arts foundations because they find that as a relatively low risk thing to put that money into that people like, and like pretty much always just as positive things for their image. And anyways, so Acton Arts Foundation of a tech company, And they have a venue called the Art Site of Railway Warehouse, which is a converted train warehouse that has been converted into like an artist studio space as well as a exhibition and gallery space. We were supposed to be in there for the residency, but everything is the same everywhere in the world. They were doing renovations at the time. And so we got moved to another location, which was fine. It was great, called, I believe the typical English word or like term for it is just General Village. But it is a military dependence village. So during one of the wars, it was constructed kind of as a safe place a bit further away from the major cities for the families of military officials to go and live while, you know, the men were off at war, basically. Since then, it's been repurposed and turned into like community buildings, shops, restaurants. They run markets there on the weekends. And we had an artist studio there that we got to use. The residency itself was very open-ended, which was a wonderful experience. There were very few expected outcomes. And so a lot of what I was doing there was simply artist research. I was kind of immersing myself in the culture. I interviewed a whole bunch of different artists and locals around kind of what their views of the culture look like, as well as kind of exchanged and told them about like how that compares and contrasts to the art and tech scene in Canada. Yeah, and we're going to be going back in late November, early December to run a event there. So yeah, that's kind of the spiel. Do you have any specific questions about that?
That's really cool. I mean, geez, questions. You know, I didn't have any concept that the Taiwanese government mandated that for-profit companies, corporations, invest a percentage of their profits into projects for the social good. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Like, there's a long history of, especially in Asia, where capitalism kind of emerged from socialist countries, and free markets kind of emerged. No market is completely free, if we're being realistic about it, but free markets kind of emerged from more socialist societies that they held on to those tenets of public good. And there's interestingly, there's a very similar kind of mandate in France, but it focuses more around companies investing in the people who are employed by them than it does like companies must have an arts foundation. And I found the comment about the arts foundation being where a lot of them kind of choose to place their investment kind of interesting and funny, because you think about it, like there is not a whole lot of risk in spinning up a foundation that invests in the creation of art, right? It's not like you have to put a lot of capital into things like industrial goods or infrastructure, roads, bridges, what have you, and what have you. So that's fascinating. A little learning about Taiwan, I guess.
Yeah. I think especially that comment, like my kind of perspective around that was helped form a little bit just by somebody that I was talking to recently, and he was saying that like they put money into the arts because actually helping people gets messy in terms of like social good, and it's like, obviously, I believe that the arts have significant benefit in society, and it's something that we need. It's something that gives us a sense of place, a sense of cultural direction. It informs our morals and ideals. But I guess the more concrete methods of actually helping people, he was right. They do get messy and essentially prevent or present quite a bit of risk for companies. So like it unfortunately kind of makes sense that so many of the companies have arts foundations.
Yeah, and you can definitely make the argument that that the arts, kind of broadly speaking, are good for society. Like I've got an arts degree, My degree is in history. I've got a humanities degree from like a small liberal arts university here. Like that's the kind of person that I am. I kind of look at the arts as a pathway to humanizing our relationships and kind of the collective environment around us. If you have kind of experience with the arts and with cultural industries, and you're oriented towards that world, I find that your perspective tends to be quite a bit broader. And when we start to lose broad-based perspectives and we start to lose sight of the relationships and the bonds between us and between the planet and kind of everything around us, that's when the fabric of society starts to fray. And of course, when the fabric of society starts to fray, then the kind of collective organization of civilization becomes very precarious. It's a bit like a house of cards. So, like saying that the arts is a benefit to society and to humanity, it absolutely is. It's just not one that you can observe practically day to day and say, yes, that painting changed the world. That is very hard to do.
And I think, that's like the most frustrating thing there is like even, the arts funding bodies, at least in Canada, like when you're reporting back to them on grants and things like that, especially if the grants were funding workshops or events or educational material, it's like, okay, like how many butts in seats, it's like how many people attended the event, what was the head count? And I think really it's so much, unfortunately, less tangible than that, but equally or more meaningful. and that's one of the trickiest things with the industry is that so many, in order to get outside investments, like in an environment like Canada, being able to prove the value of it is a very hard thing to do to companies or funding bodies that only respect like hard numbers. So not an easy problem to solve, but it's what we're trying to do, I guess, is one obviously there's the whole kind of culture for what's coming angle, but also what we're doing as UKAI Projects right now is also just trying to figure out like what are better and innovative ways for artists to make money. And so that's kind of an interesting series of experiments that we are running, have been running, and are continuing to run. So
yeah, and that's another kind of historically fraught kind of topic too, right? Like artists making money. If you think back to the medieval ages, the Renaissance period in particular, artists made their money by having patrons. So if you could get yourself into a scenario where you were the patron sculptor of some duke or some baron or someone who had a lot of money and controlled a lot of power through the feudal system or through like the emerging industrial system in the 1800s, you were set. But it was very rare that one duke would be the patron duke to 1,000 artists. So the other 999 artists, like they just kind of had to go about their day and whatever. And that kind of reality is still reflected today for a lot of artists. Like the term starving artist is, it's a thing, right? Like you don't make a lot of money when you're an artist. So any innovation around how artists support themselves is, I think, probably a welcome thing, because I believe we could use more art and more cultural meaning in our lives. And of course, to support that, those people have to be able to live their lives, pay the rent, get groceries, clothes, all that.
Yeah. I mean, so I'll tell you about one of the experiments just a little bit. We haven't launched it yet, but I think it's fine that I'm talking to you about it. It's basically our idea is for a reverse RFP. So, so often companies put out RFPs with all these very specific requirements, requests for proposals, or even from within the arts world, you end up with things like open calls from galleries, for exhibitions and things like that, where you as an artist basically just need to pitch yourself, throw your work into the void, and hope that they like it enough to, put you in the show. Sometimes they will pay you an exhibition fee. Sometimes they will not. Sometimes they will charge you to submit your artwork. Sometimes they will not. And it's just like a very, it's a crapshoot for artists a lot of the time, where unless you're like considered good enough or you have a big enough following that it's kind of a no-brainer for them to include you from the clout perspective or whatever. It really is a crapshoot. And so what we're interested in doing is essentially making fun of that process in a viciously serious way of so for our definition of RFP, we're going to call it a request for partnerships. And essentially what we are proposing is that we believe that, as you said as well, artists have often a certain perspective or a broader set of perspectives that is simply not present within the population that works in 9-to-5 corporate jobs. And no matter how much of a specialized individual you hire to solve certain problems, the problem solving that you will get from individuals within a company and even consultants interacting with a company will never necessarily be the same or as creative or just different as you might get by allowing an artist to interact with a problem scope in a certain way. And so we're essentially proposing kind of like a artistic consultant firm proposal sort of thing, in a way, where you as a company apply, and then we select one or more artists who essentially embed themselves in your institution for whatever the time of the engagement is that we agree upon. You set the problem, the company sets the problem scope, but gets no say as to the actual output of the consultancy. And so we're not sure if any company at all is going to bite for this, because the proposal is, in a way, a little absurd. But the goal is really to show, in a way, the absurdity and the imbalance of an RFP in general, especially from the side of the artists who might be usually responding to them. And in doing all this, the goal is to create like open documentation, work in the open, kind of talk about how the artist is going through their processes, what they might be doing differently in comparison to what a company is doing to solve these sorts of problems. And in addition to that, we are hoping to have some people come onto a talk show of our own and basically tear our idea apart, or compliment it, whatever. And that's sort of also part of our developing in the open philosophy of like, we get that this is kind of a crazy idea. We're doing it anyways. And we want to have open, honest conversations with people, analyzing it, tearing it apart, complimenting it, and then we'll make revisions to it and continue to see if people bite, if companies bite and engage. So that's one of the ideas that we are about to launch in a month or two. But yeah, so it's a fun one, a little crazy, but an experiment to see what it's like if companies are willing to engage when artists have kind of the power and the upper hand and the ability to make or at least propose broader creative, structural, systemic changes.
Sign me up.
Yeah, I mean, I want you to be one of the people to come on to our radio and talk to us about it. Yeah.
That's really cool. Because if you abstract away the part where it's artists, like essentially the idea is It's relationship brokering, which is it's well established. Relationship brokering is in use in the private and public sectors for a variety of different things. Even recruiters, right? Like recruiters are relationship brokers, really, more so headhunters than recruiters. But the model and the concept isn't anything crazy whatsoever. What's different is the part that you're talking about, where it's like, hey, let's flip this on the head and have the person who is receiving the money be in charge of acceptance and the process of delivering the work. And that's different. Like, a lot of people who are in corporate Canada, if they're watching this, are going to be like, that's crazy. I there's no control. I don't like that, which is fair. If you're putting down 6 figures on something or 7 figures on something, or even a smaller amount, you want some form of control over the outcome, or you at least want to have control over the process of mitigating risk that could come from having a bad outcome. It's interesting. The example I kind of think is like, you talk about in the age of AI, you talk about well, why would I hire McKinsey or BCG or Bain or any of those big consulting firms when I can just dump my requirements into an AI system, an LLM, and have it produce the work like a billion times faster and probably equal or better quality, blah, blah, blah. But consulting firms they're doing just fine. And they're doing just fine because they are not, and probably to some extent never were, buying a plan or an output. They were buying insurance. They were buying the ability to say to a board, well, we hired McKinsey. It went sideways, but we hired McKinsey. Like, it's not my fault. We hired McKinsey, for God's sakes. That's what people are buying from consultants. So
that's a really interesting perspective of like essentially the offloading of responsibility, right, to the firm that they're engaging with, rather than just saying, well, I asked AI and that way it's still your problem.
yeah. And the other kind of side of that coin about what you're talking about that UKAI is kind of developing is it is a very radical experiment in taking fresh perspectives oriented towards solving a problem. I personally have always been just a huge believer in multidisciplinary approaches to problem solving. So you don't define a problem and say this is a problem, and then go pick the person who has the most experience in the subject area of that problem and say, yo, go solve that problem. Like, we'll just throw you at it. It's all good, done, solved. You will solve a problem sometimes you won't. But I find that if you put people on a problem that have no experience with it whatsoever, but they have some fundamental soft skills, like strong critical thinking, reasoning skills, the ability to be inquisitive and curious, and to talk to other people. If you have those soft skills, no matter what your experience or background is, you can probably come to a problem and have something really valuable to contribute to it. So, saying to corporate Canada, who might be like a part of this experiment that you guys are planning to run, which I think is really cool. We're going to run a lab on solving some of your most ridiculous problems, but you need to basically keep your noses out of it. Tough sell, but at the same time, interesting things would come from that.
Yep.
Like, I'd be super curious to see what resulted from that process actually playing out if it got to its conclusion. Because the artist, like the person who's embedded, would have to, they have to fight with the people dynamics internally too, which would be extremely challenging. But if you got to a point where there was actually a solution on the table, I'd be super curious to see what that would be relative to the problem.
Yeah, no, and I mean, you and I are both very much on the same page of the multidisciplinary problem solving, because like my background is all over the place, right? Because it's like I studied aerospace engineering, essentially mostly self-taught for programming, somewhat on the design side as well. Like, I do web dev, I do photography, interactive media installations, creative coding, which I guess is all like a bunch of the stuff I just mentioned is kind of in the same wheelhouse. But I think just like having that breadth of experience is so valuable. And like the thing I'm most thankful for in my upbringing and my education is that I'm very confident that even like if you give me any problem, I can probably at least get like part of the way to a solution for it, even if I start out knowing nothing about it. And especially given the kind of breadth of my knowledge and like depth of that in certain areas, particularly like the combination of like tech and creative sectors. It gives me a lot of confidence in being able to engage with a lot of different things these days. And I think really selling that idea essentially of I know a lot of people like me that would really stand to benefit from kind of having that at least a bubble of free reign to act within. And but companies are often very adverse to letting somebody engage with a problem that isn't a subject matter expert in that problem, right? And so I guess that's as you were saying is kind of the tough sell. Well, yeah.
Yeah, and then you've especially with kind of mature organizations, you also have that layer of organizational hierarchy. A lot of companies that are mature are really not comfortable with kind of shooting from the hip or turning over control, letting the reins kind of go to somebody who is not of sufficient like place and rank within that organizational structure. Big projects are run by directors, big projects are run by project managers, senior project managers, vice presidents, EVPs, all of that. So to say like, this person doesn't know really much of anything about the direct problem. They don't work for you. They don't have a corporate job title, but hey, they might solve your problem.
Mm-hmm.
That's like, that's going to live rent free in my brain for a while.
Well, you'll definitely hear about it sooner rather than later, and I'll let you know how it goes. And yeah, we can bring you on to talk more about it as well. Yeah.
That's cool. Let's wrap up by talking about you. You mentioned that you're freelancing, and that obviously has its it obviously has its points where there are ups and downs. When you're a freelancer, like there are high points and there are low points. Like being working for yourself is definitely a very freeing experience, but it can also be a little bit nerve-wracking. What I would kind of like to hear from you is there any advice that you would have for someone who kind of wants to follow in your footsteps and wants to say like, hey, I'm going to freelance. I want to kind of do my own thing, kind of pursue my own passions and make some money from it. What would you say to them?
So I guess like first, I would acknowledge that I'm definitely coming from a place of privilege going into my kind of freelancing unknown. Not that I'm from a particularly wealthy family, not at all. But the financial literacy and savings that I have built up fairly early in my career gives me a lot of confidence to like I being very honest, I can have months where like right now at least where I make no money, and that's okay for now. Because of kind of the cushion that I've built for myself. So I think that alone is something that's extremely valuable to have. And if that means kind of going econ and sitting in your current job for maybe a little bit longer, going I think it was maybe I'm not sure how common of a term it is. I think it was podcast with like the Airbnb CEO, but like going ramen profitable, where if everybody at your company only eats cup noodles, then and and you are profitable, then like, you know, just live that way for a time. But I think it is very important to kind of start out with some degree of financial security, which in itself is a privilege, before jumping into the unknown, because that makes it a lot easier, not just from a, like in a literal sense, but like also just from a headspace sense of, you know, I essentially treat myself as a business in a way these days. And it's like, okay, I have X months of runway to explore and figure things out. And it's not that I don't have ideas already for how I'm going to, you know, continue growing my income, making it more stable. But I have set myself up in such a way that I can make zero money for X number of months as I go through this process of experimenting and figuring things out. So I guess that's kind of like a very unfortunate piece of advice, where it's like, have money first before you quit your job, I guess.
Yeah,
if
which
you intend on going that route.
which is funny to, you're right, it is, and I'm the same. Like I can have months working for myself where I make no money or little money, but I'm okay with that because I did the same. Like I put away money religiously. I've always been more of a saver than a spender anyway, so like I can go months without making any money, and it's totally fine. That's not everybody's reality. Like we've got to recognize that for sure. I think that the one thing that definitely kind of stood out for me in that is that having a sense of financial security, even if it's uncomfortable, gives you kind of a solid platform or a solid foundation. So for folks at home who are like, well, you know, I can't quit my job without certainty that I'm going to be able to make a living doing what I do. Let me just put a little bit of cold water on the idea that you will quit your job and immediately replace your income. You will not.
I'm still not making much money, to be fair. Like, yeah, but I'm on the path, right? So
yeah, you don't quit your job and replace your full-time income right away. You don't, people at home. So, you know, there are ways to kind of like bridge those two experiences. You know, if you want to get into working for yourself and start kind of walking down that pathway, you can start out, you know, still working your full-time job. You can adopt like the portfolio career approach, which I'm a big fan of, given how tenuous employer-employee relationships can be in some industries, especially now. So start doing like little side hustles that make some money. Like that'll give you experience and give you some confidence. You'll be able to get started. From there, once you've generated enough of like a kind of a base underneath yourself, you don't have to go from a full-time job to full-time freelancing. You can bridge it by having a part-time job, you know, and part-time jobs in the economy are actually, the opportunities are kicking up because employers are saying, you know, we need to kind of mitigate payroll risk a little bit, but we still have the need to hire talent. There are also programs in EI where you can do job sharing now, which lets people who are kind of further on in their career scale back, work part-time, and people who otherwise wouldn't qualify for EI if they've been laid off and are looking for a job, they can look for those opportunities that are part-time in nature and still be in like the EI system if they need to be. So the world is kind of pivoting towards this place where part-time employment isn't just, you know, retail. It's not just food service. Like there are professional jobs now that are part-time. So use that as kind of an opportunity for bridging. And then once you've gotten yourself to a point where you've built your business, you've built your skills, you've built the infrastructure, the confidence, and the client list really, to kind of make that leap and start working for yourself full-time, then do it. But there's absolutely nothing saying you have to go from 0 to 100 overnight. Ben is, you know, he's absolutely saying that. I'm absolutely saying that. Both of us from experience this year. Yeah. So like you can tiptoe. You don't have to like sprint right from the start.
Yeah, I think there's, and that's kind of a also broader piece of advice of just like, keep in mind that a lot of the time, or most of the time, things are not black and white. Like you can do a little bit of something on the side, or even if we're not talking about jobs, like it's not, most things are not all or nothing. And so I think it's just very important to remember that. I did, sorry, I was also trying to come up with other advice and like things that I've told my friends as well. Okay, so yeah, one piece, I'll try to keep it short, is as much as I hate the phrase, like your network is your net worth, it's so true. Right? Like I generally don't consider myself to be like a particularly extroverted person, but the amount of opportunities that I have gotten even before I went freelance, simply from like knowing people in all sorts of different industries, has been insane. And you need to allow, you will never find opportunities if you are sitting alone in your room. Basically is what I'm getting at. You need to get out there into spaces that are generally related or even completely unrelated to what you're trying to do. And you need to talk about yourself. You need to talk about yourself and the things that you are capable of doing and the things that you want to do, because otherwise people will not go out of their way to look for you for the most part. So I guess the most concise way of phrasing that is like, be social and talk about yourself. Because if people know about you and you can stick out in their minds as being at least interesting, if not good at what you do, that can get you a long way, much further than being very good at what you do and sitting alone in your room. So I think that is what I've especially been trying to tell any of my friends who are like trying to make it in any industry, is like, just get out there and talk to people, because you need to find the people who have money and want to pay you to do the thing that you're doing. Like that is so important. More important, in my opinion, than being the best at what you do, is knowing people. So,
even more so now.
Yep.
The another impact of this kind of AI reality, like disruption of the labor market, kind of entrenchment of technology, is that in the digital spaces where you would be able to make connections with people that led somewhere, from the comfort of your couch or whatever, those digital spaces are being flooded by slop. There's so much self-promotion everywhere. It's generated by AI, and the volume of it has gone up, like 100-fold over what it was 5 years ago. So it's harder to make connections digitally than it was 5 years ago. And the antidote to that is one of my kind of like favorite life lessons, and it applies to pretty much everything, is if you want to do something and be successful at it, do what others aren't. So like, if everybody is running like a herd towards one thing, look for where you can go somewhere else in the opposite direction. And what Ben talks about with being present and building those relationships in person is exactly that. Because AI cannot penetrate in-person networking events. It can't slop out conversations that you're having when you're present with people, right? Same thing with like speaking or teaching seminars, as Ben did earlier this year, or anything where you're face-to-face with a person and you're outside of those social networks, those digital spaces. AI can't drown you out. So you've got a much better shot at your voice being heard. So go do that. And it's tough. Ben said, he's an introvert. I am an introvert. I'm an introvert who has a YouTube show, right? It's hard, but if you do it, like, you'll get some benefit from it.
Yeah. And I think if, at least for me, I don't necessarily also believe that anybody is 100% like an introvert or an extrovert. I think really it depends on context and topics. Like I think broadly, yes, there are people could be bunched into those categories, but like at least for me, when I get myself into like a creative technology, new media event, space, I can talk to people for hours there. I love nerding out with people who are maybe like me or doing like similar things, just talking to them about the various softwares that they use and like, oh, how does this thing work? And yeah, that's always a really fun experience for me. So yeah, I think, it can be hard. It can be very hard, but it also doesn't need to be if you can find, I think, a semblance of community in it. And that can be very freeing and nice. Yeah, the very last piece of advice that I wanted to throw out, which I guess is almost more a word of warning, is that especially if you are kind of planning on operating freelance or running your own business, you need to be willing to wear many hats, or at least be willing to expend capital to other people to wear those hats for you. Because you need to be your own accountant if you don't have one, and you need to market yourself to some extent, at least. I think networking, depending on your industry, can serve as that marketing. You might need a website built, and you need to do that or pay somebody to do that. I think there's all these aspects of it that it's important to acknowledge that they are things that need to be done outside of just the whatever niche you're trying to fill. So I think just ensuring that mentally you are prepared to either tackle those things yourself and have the time to do so, or to pay somebody to do those things. It's just important to acknowledge, and a reality of the kind of freelance or kind of self-employed startup life.
That is also good advice. It's been a fantastic conversation. Let's leave it there. And for the folks at home, I have a ton of stuff to put in the show notes. So much so that I'm going to have to watch this recording over again to make sure I don't miss anything. But Ben, I'll be in touch. We will put some stuff in the show notes. And for folks who want to find Ben, he's on LinkedIn. That will also go in the show notes. And he has a collection of very, very interesting Instagram accounts that I follow them all, and I love them all. So we'll put those in the show notes too, so you can get more Ben in your life. Thanks again for joining us, Ben. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Paul. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to the Journey in Conversation. If you liked this episode, follow or subscribe so you don't miss the next one. More builders, more breakthroughs, coming soon.